Hello and welcome back to the game room. You know what I love? Video games. You know what I love talking about? Games. And it seems like a lot of people these days who cover games seem to hate them. Or at least the people who play them. Well, that's not me, and that's not the 1,642 of you beautiful people checking out this video here today. Now, you know what? I wanted to give a little inside baseball here. So I was actually reached out to by some company that was trying to get me to sponsor what likely was a terrible mobile game for a 5-minute video, couple $100. Their name is Astifire, and they, for some reason, in order to do this sponsorship, require to have me link my YouTube channel to their platform so they can monitor analytics and fix the dashboard. Which, I don't know about you guys, but that sounds like a great way to lose your channel to some heartless corporation, especially for a few $100s. So, other smaller creators out there, be weary of this kind of stuff. Now bear in mind, I'm some guy making $30 a month on Patreon, so I don't know anything. But I would be highly hesitant to give any sort of company that level of access to your channel, especially since they require you to have 1,000 members or more. That's a good way to get it taken away. But that's not why you're here today. Why you're here today is that there's a lot of games out there that just aren't great, but they're not terrible. And there's new terminology these days saying they're mid. So let's jump on that and check out some games that are painfully mid.
There's a lot of games out there, some of which you've never even heard of. That's where I come in. My name's Luke. I've been playing games since the age of 2, and I have no life.
This is my game room.
Alright, so we're looking at a lot more modern games for this video than typical, just because I tend to be a pretty generous person when it comes to how I oversee things. Usually I think something's pretty good or just outright terrible, but I don't put the mid label, mediocre, on too many things. But unfortunately, I've played a lot of them lately, and we're going to start off with one that I did cover on the channel that was the third game, maybe technically the 3.5 game, because I know there was a little bit of a DLC that was almost like another game, and that was Infamous Second Son. So the Infamous series, it's funny, no one really thinks of them now. I think the Sucker Punch are the ones who made these games. When these came out, there really wasn't that open world kind of feel, at least with the first two Infamouses. So when the third one was coming, they had a new protagonist, they had a new skill set, but after playing it, it's almost like they didn't want to go whole hog into that skill set, because in the first two games you just got electric powers. Well, in this game you have some guy who can suck the powers of all who around him, and eventually you get neon powers, you get light power or video powers, you have smoke powers, and I think you even get earth or rock powers towards the end of it. But the neon and the video powers are very similar to things like electricity, so it just felt like they had run out of steam. They didn't want to quite commit to what they were doing, as well as getting the smoke. Unlike getting the electric power where electricity is everywhere in a big city, going to smoke, you really were relying on things like cars and going up to smokestacks on top of buildings. So it just, and then the storyline wasn't very interesting, and unfortunately the series died after this. And this was one of the first PS4 exclusives, if I recall. It came out fairly early on in the PS4's life cycle, maybe even 2014, I would say. Came out, disappeared. It's worth playing. When I covered it, I still said it was worth playing. The main character is not as engaging as Cole, in my opinion, and the storyline kind of retreads a lot of the same waters as the first one. But then the second game wrapped up the series, but then it continues on, and it doesn't continue on in a great way. So it's just a game that, I don't know, I can't really recommend it unless you get it for dirt cheap, which you can get it for dirt cheap, so then maybe I'd recommend picking it up. Alright, another one along those lines. Now, this game is stupid fun, don't get me wrong, but it is nothing lasting, and it is nothing great, and I do still have that copy I need to give away somehow if I ever figure out a way to do it, and that game is Maneater. Now, Maneater, you play as a shark. It's pretty much the closest thing to playing as Jaws as you would want. It's ridiculous. You go through open waters and find little collectibles, eat people, go up against big bad monsters, and just it's a lot of rinse and repeat. But not the gameplay loop isn't that great, because this is just a problem of gaming. It is hard to do something underwater and make it good. When you have in a 3D environment, when you have an XY axis, you can deal with it, even going up and down. But when you're constantly having to worry about 360 motion, it just doesn't come out great. Now, as far as being a shark, this is probably the closest I've seen to it. I haven't played Jaws Unleashed on PS2. I played it briefly on the PC on a potato computer that couldn't run it. So I've heard that game is better. But all in all, especially because they give you the option to evolve your shark, which I thought going into it was going to be something like Evo. In the end, it was really lackluster and didn't help all that much. It just seemed like unnecessary customization for customization's sake. Still a fun game. Still one you can get on modern consoles now and is fairly cheap, but is nothing to write home about. And another one that I was sorely disappointed in was Yooka Laylee. So Yooka Laylee is trying to be like Banjo-Kazooie. It just isn't. I can't exactly place my finger why it's not. The zones, first of all, they only have 5 zones, which I don't like. They have 5 zones that you expand on, which as just a principle I don't like. One of the main things I loved about Mario 64, I loved about the original Banjo-Kazooie, was going into the different areas. I don't mind if they're smaller. I don't mind if there's not as much to do in each one. Not everyone needs to have the same 16 collectibles that can be found in every single one. But you get 5 zones, and as you go through the zones and collect pages, or I think they're pages, you then expand the zone. So then it gets larger. So then now you'll be looking at it and there'll be things you couldn't access before. There's new areas, things have added to it. And I didn't enjoy that concept. It was a fun concept for them to go with. If they'd had more than 5, I might have enjoyed it more. But it just felt like they were trying so hard that they missed the point in some ways. And Yooka Laylee I didn't enjoy. I've heard the Impossible Lair is a lot of fun, but that is kind of just where we're at with that one. Now, another one that I covered on the channel, actually, I didn't cover it, my cat Reaper did. Oh, hey, look at that. I guess you haven't forgotten about me, because he's got great reviews himself, is the game Cat Quest. Now, I wanted to love this game a lot. I just couldn't. It didn't have that much going for it. The non-stop cat puns and everything got a little tired, in my opinion. I do have the sequel. I've yet to play it, but it plays like a mobile game, and not in a good way. And I know I probably am expecting way too much from a game called Cat Quest, but I just wasn't satisfied with it. I didn't enjoy it, and I would almost say it's beyond being mid to even being low grade, but just not a great game in my opinion. And another PS4 game that is not a great game that I was really looking forward to was supposed to be the spiritual successor to the Burnout series, and that game is Dangerous Driving. Now, one of the big drawbacks that it had that I didn't think was going to be that big of a drawback is there is no licensed music in it. Now, it does have the option for you to put your Spotify account into it, but I don't really listen to Spotify. I'm also not someone who likes to... I don't listen to much music. I listen to a lot more podcasts than anything, so I wouldn't begin to know where to go with it. It didn't capture my attention. It felt like Burnout, but it didn't feel like it. And I don't remember there being that many different races. And I put it in and played it for maybe a few hours and put it down, and just never thought about it again. And it was sad. It was one of those ones I was really looking forward to, but it's funny. Something as silly as not having any music to it really did hamper it. And it didn't have very interesting locations. The cars weren't very interesting. It had the right feel. It had the right feel and the right speed, but God, it's funny how much music can affect things. And that one, I think, really did get hampered by that. And then the last game on the PS4 we're going to talk about was a game I had not planned on picking up until I saw someone live streaming it the day it came out. And as happens to me sometimes, I do get that last minute FOMO where I'm like, all right, I should check this out. And that game is Tom Clancy's The Division. Another one of these always online games, kind of in the vein of Destiny and whatnot. I never really played the multiplayer on it. I didn't go into the dark zones that much, and it felt like another Borderlands type bullet sponge game with constantly changing your weapons. It didn't really do much, and I maybe played it for a few weeks and put it down, never thought about it again. The only time I ever thought of the series again was when the Division 2 had that ad campaign that said, here's what a real government shutdown looks like, and then they got in trouble for that. Yeah, just not something I enjoyed. I really am not a fan of these games that are just meant to be prolongedly played forever, which is funny because I got hooked on that with WoW, but I've never been able to be effectively hooked on that again. Because that's kind of how I am. Is I had my fill in a game like that. I don't necessarily want to recreate that experience in everything. And unfortunately, that experience makes companies a lot of money, so they want to recreate it. And that's why a lot of games we have these days are like this or have business practices like that. All right, let's switch up to the PS5 now. So here's a game I just beat, actually. I just beat it recently. Now it's also a PS4 game, and that is Jedi Fallen Order. So this is essentially a Dark Souls-like without any of the soul behind it. Also, it takes place in the Disney Star Wars universe where how many times are we going to find out about a Jedi that escaped the Purge and somehow is never mentioned in the main canon of the storyline, yet you see cameos from people like Darth Vader. It gets a little tired. I'm not invested in the main character whatsoever. I'm not invested in the main storyline whatsoever. By the end of the game, you get the list of the young Jedi-trained people, and then you decide not to use it because, I don't know, reasons. I don't know. There's a sequel that came out. It was fun to go through the Star Wars universe and kind of have that difficult feel, but it just didn't feel right, and just wasn't very memorable. As well as the main villain, like especially the last battle against the main villain was so freaking tedious that I can't even, like, you have these minute windows of attack opportunity, but then there's certain things you can't dodge whatsoever. Like, it just, up until then, there was a lot of things you could mitigate, but on that fight alone, you couldn't mitigate anything. And it took an exorbitantly long amount of time and was super frustrating. The whole game, full of collectibles too, full of random stuff. And that's the other thing, is there's nothing you can collect in the world that really affects anything. The main thing I wanted to do was change my lightsaber color, which there was a pre-order bonus orange lightsaber color that they just included as an update. So that was nice. Good on EA for that. But, and also, because it is by the guys who made Titanfall 2, there is a lot of that Titanfall 2 DNA where you can wall run and things of that. So the mobility is nice, but then the actual, this gameplay and the fact that you're searching around, you don't find anything worth of value. You find cosmetics to change your outfit, you find things to change the hilt of your lightsaber, but you only get the lightsaber crystals at the last 10% of the game, which was a huge mistake. A huge mistake, because that's the only thing I cared about was changing my lightsaber color. And it just gave you blue, green, and orange, and then at the very end of the game, you get all the other colors. So just something I still would say is worth $20. That's what I paid for it, but just a very disappointing. And at the point where I just started skipping dialogue, I didn't care about any of these people. There's all these Force users that survived and turned to the dark. Like, come on, you guys! It just doesn't make any damn sense. And that's where we got on that. And then another one that might surprise a lot of you, because this game got a lot of positive press and a lot of negative press. And then I feel like a lot of the positive press was in direct response to the type of negative press it got. And that game is Hogwarts Legacy. And while this is one of the most gorgeous recreations of a fantasy world come to life I can ever think of, especially for Harry Potter fans, this is something that it would just be fun to look around and check out the lore of. As far as a game goes, it is one of the most frustrating games I've ever played, because it does not respect your time in the least. It literally gives you timers for making potions, gives you timers for your monster menagerie, gives you timers for even putting on your outfits. Like, everything takes so damn long. You can only buy one thing at a time. You can only have a certain amount of reagents. Even then, they don't really matter. Timers getting onto your broomstick, timers, like, there's so many. It's got mobile game design for a single player game, or not even mobile game, like MMO design more like it, for a single player game, which doesn't make any damn sense. Now, one thing I will give them credit for is that they do allow the dark arts spells, like Avada Kedavra, break the game. So you can one-shot bosses using it if you decide to go down that pathway. But the other part is, it really doesn't matter which house you're in, and it really doesn't matter if you do that, because the ending is the same regardless. One major character will die before a fight, or after the fight, depending on which side you go on. And even if you decide to keep or release the thing at the end, that doesn't really matter either. I mean, unless they're making a sequel. And again, with these games that take place in worlds before the storylines we know, at a certain point, you know nothing's going to matter or nothing's going to change anything. So it's a hard place to be if you have all of these annoyances and if you're trying to make such a story-centric game, which I was in. It's funny, people said the game started off slowly. I was actually pretty invested the first hour or so until I got to Hogwarts, and then once you realize, like, wow, you're actually going to have to go through and do all this tedium going through the castle. And with all these games where they have these big castles or these big places, I find myself looking at the map and following a line, or I find myself looking at the thing and following a line and not really enjoying all of the beautiful scenery around me. I mean, the only game I can think of in recent memory to get this one right was Ghost of Tsushima, where it would have the wind guide you. Because other than that, it's kind of like I want to find the most efficient way to get to the next task, because there's so many of them. In this game, you change your outfits constantly, but you can't set a default look. So if you don't want to look like an idiot all the time, a transmog, you can go in and change it to look like one of your earlier things. But then once you find a new item, then it goes back, and then you have to go back into your menu and then change it. And you can only have so much in your inventory, and you can't just bulk sell things. It is so burdened by this stupid tedium. And this is a brand new developer too in their first game. So yeah, they got a lot of things right, but they got a lot of things wrong. And I feel like people are just saying this game is so great to own the people who are saying this game it sucks because it's made by J.K. Rowling, or because it's, you know, J.K. Rowling's universe. But you're not looking at the actual game, and the actual game has a lot wrong with it. Has got a lot right with it. It's a great representation of the universe, but as far as being a fun game to play, not so much. All right. And then let's move on to a game series that I have spoken of before. So while not as bad as the next game after this, Revelations, Assassin's Creed Brotherhood is really where the Assassin's... I mean, this is the third game, but it really starts to tank the series as far as progressing it. Because before this, you had Ezio playing as Auditore, and then as Ezio. And then in this game, you're playing as Ezio again, and the whole focus is on building a brotherhood of people. And it starts losing that thing of you're a lone assassin going through and killing things, and more building in it as you're this group of this Assassin's Creed people who are fighting against the Templars. And this is the first one that really leaned into that heavily. And I thought Revelations was terrible. Now 3 I enjoyed, 4 I really enjoyed, and then like I said, I gave up on the series. But Brotherhood was just more of the same. It really felt like DLC for part 2, and not in a bad way. Like, it was cool. Like, with these games, especially earlier on, it was really impressive to see, wow, look at these photorealistic recreations of these ancient places. This is so cool. But then it started to wear thin, and I think the veneer first started coming off with this particular game. Now, another game that is based on a popular series that I was super hyped for, and then I just lost interest in, was the Telltale Game of Thrones series. Now, for those who don't know, when these Telltale games would come out, they would release episodes. So you would buy episode 1 for like $10, and then 2 months later, the second one would come out, the third one would come out like 2-3 months later, and then eventually, maybe a year down the line, the whole thing would be out, and eventually you could buy a physical copy of it. So I got the first one. This was when Game of Thrones, I want to say, was in season 3 or so. And it's not based on the show. It's based on a made-up family that interacts loosely with characters from the show. And one of the problems with that is that, you know, if they interact with characters from the show, they can't really affect anything. So it's kind of a catch-22 of it almost, it's nice that you can see, oh, look, there's Marjorie Tyrell, or there's Ramsay Bolton. But then it's like, well, I can't do anything to them. I'm just going to be either, if they're in it, nothing of note is going to happen. And they end the first chapter with a big reveal of one of the main characters getting killed, but it felt like it wasn't earned. It felt too much like, okay, they're just trying to be like the show too much. And I just lost interest in the further ones, and I never ended up finishing it. All right, another one on the Xbox One that I wasn't a huge fan of is Halo 5. Now, I played all the Halos up until Reach. I did not play Halo 4 when it went to 343, but I did want to check out Halo 5. It had a more interesting story, in my opinion, and I could not have been more wrong. I did not enjoy the changes. Now, it was weird going and having the sword have new sound effects and things of that nature, but the multiplayer, I will say, felt like Halo. I think the multiplayer was solid, but the actual campaign did not feel that good. Now, it was hard because the last one I had in my mind was Reach, which Reach itself wasn't even really a typical Halo campaign, but it was so good. The jumping into 5 just wasn't all that satisfying. I had missed 4, so I didn't know what was going on with Cortana. I wasn't sure why she was a villain or anything like that, but just all in all, didn't enjoy it that much and wasn't all that memorable. Alright, let's shift to the GameCube. So one of the first games I got for the GameCube that I was super excited for because the one on the N64 was incredible was Wave Race Blue Storm. And try as I might, this game just didn't have the same lasting appeal. It was not, I mean, the water looked better, but it didn't feel as good as the N64. The racing didn't feel as good. And I think the general gaming audience felt the same way because this series pretty much disappeared after Blue Storm, which is a shame. I really enjoyed Wave Race, but it just didn't have, like, I don't remember the majesty of Drake Lake or the coolness of the ocean blue area with the killer whale that would jump or the Sea of Storms thing. Like, all these levels just felt a little bit generic, and maybe the blockiness of the N64 helped it just look more stylized, but because I still like the N64 Wave Race to this day, but Blue Storm was just not that great, and I can't really place my finger on why. It should have been. It's just a testament of, hey, just because it's newer doesn't always mean it's better. Now, here's another one that I was super excited for the GameCube, because it was a Final Fantasy. We were finally getting it. I had only played Final Fantasies on the PS1, had never played the Super Nintendo ones, and that was Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles. But this wasn't a turn-based game. This was more of a dungeon crawler type action-adventure game. And it almost felt like at a certain point I was there was more content to the game than there should have been, or there should have been more content, because you got to this point where you had to go through the same levels over and over again to unlock new things, and then you just ran out of stuff to do. And then me and my buddy Sean ended up beating it. I think I've told the story before where I went over to his house and we were on the last boss, and then his mom had him go to dinner. And so I was playing with both controllers, and I was able to beat the last boss without him. And he came back and he's like, "You beat the game?" I'm like, "Yeah, I beat the game. Sorry, bud." But other than that, I don't have much fondness for the game. I know they remastered it and had it come out again a couple of years ago, and it disappeared pretty quickly. So other than it being cool for the Game Boy Advance Link connectors, can't really think anything else this game did that was that special. And as far as being a Final Fantasy game on a Nintendo console, no, it was not a Final Fantasy game. It just had the Final Fantasy moniker. And another game that was super hyped when this was coming out, and I bought into it big time. It still has one of the coolest covers as far as any GameCube game goes. And it wasn't just the GameCube, it was on other systems too. And that was Enter the Matrix. So you can see it kind of has this holographicness. So this game was so hype when it was coming out because it not only were we playing a movie-based game that was going to be very true to the source material, but this was actually focusing on characters that weren't the main characters. So you didn't have to worry about them inventing things or changing the storyline or not being faithful. It was focusing on two of the minor characters, which were Jada Pinkett Smith's character and the other guy's named Ghost, I believe. So they were focusing on them, and it was actually going to tell their side of their stories in addition to what happened in the second Matrix movie. And I think it came out before the second Matrix movie, or it was supposed to come out at the same time, or I don't remember exactly. Maybe it came out slightly after it. And maybe the fact that the second Matrix movie was not all that great also affected it. But it just, at the end of the day, it was interesting playing something that was canon, but it wasn't all that interesting. Because let's face it, if you're in the Matrix and you're playing a game about the Matrix, I want to play as Neo. I want to play as Morpheus. I want to play as Trinity. I don't want to play as these new people that they just create for the game. Because this game, I believe, was made hand in glove with the actual movie. So as far as it being a faithful and a cool... Because now they do more of this stuff where they make side stories or they make things that aren't actually attached to the main plot. And this was the first game that ever really did that in my memory. But as far as being a good game, not really. Okay. And then moving to one that's probably going to get me some hate, especially from my long-term fans. This is a game that I played, and it's a super expensive Super Nintendo game. It is the third game in a series based on a very hard NES series, an arcade series, starring a guy named Firebrand, and that is Demon's Crest. And I don't know if people are just so blinded by the artwork and kind of the metalness of it, but I did not enjoy the deliberate pace of the game. I didn't enjoy the exploration, and I also didn't enjoy the fact that I ended up beating the game on accident 2 hours in, especially given how expensive it is. Not that that matters, but it really was not what I was expecting. And I know my buddy Wes, even at the time, said I need to go back and play it again because I didn't do it the right way, which he might be right. But I don't know. I don't know what it is. I'd probably be more likely to end up selling it than I would to play it again. But let me know if I'm wrong. I mean, I covered the game years ago now, like 6 or 7 years ago now. It's been a while. And I just didn't like it. I didn't like it. I don't know why. It just didn't appeal to me. The subject matter is just not up my alley. And it's got beautiful graphics. It looks great. Just not my style. Now, another game that is based on a television series that for some reason, even though I was the target demographic when it came out, I was so embarrassed to say I liked it. And that is the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers on SNES. So this is an action-adventure game, or maybe just an action game, almost like an action beat-em-up, where you can play as all 5 of the Rangers. They don't really have much different with their skill set, and I believe there is a 2-player simultaneous co-op mode, so it is fun for that. But it's just a standard kind of lifeless beat-em-up. I don't remember it being all that special. It is pretty dang hard. I don't know if I ever beat the damn thing. As far as characters from the show showing up, I don't remember it being all that faithful, but just another nice thing to check out. It is based on the original iteration of the show, but nothing all that special, nothing all that memorable. But hey, like I said, all these games are not terrible. They're just mid. And the last 2, so let's figure out this one, which was based on a movie that was a huge surprise hit by a company no one ever heard of named Pixar. I had to get the game because I love the movie, and that was Toy Story. But once again, this was the era of movie games not really being all that great, and Toy Story is another example of that. It's kind of a soulless platformer. Nothing much happens. You play as Woody, and that's really all I remember about it. I remember being pretty disappointed with it. It's not terrible, just not that great. And then the last one we're going to talk about is a return to form on the N64 for James Bond, which was 007: The World Is Not Enough. Now, while it is a decent enough movie, the game, I think, is probably better, but when you compare it to GoldenEye and then Perfect Dark, which I want to say came out the year before this, is not great. Although if you compare it to the Tomorrow Never Dies game on the PS1, it is freaking fantastic. But all in all, it is just a serviceable game. I think the best thing it has going for it is it has a blue cartridge for some reason, but there's just not much else to it that makes it all that memorable, which is kind of what happened to the James Bond license in general. Like, they struck fire on the GameCube PS2 era early on with Agent Under Fire and Nightfire and maybe a couple other ones. But after that, it petered out, and they kept trying to go back to that GoldenEye well, and it just never picked up. And there you go. Those are games that, in my opinion, are painfully mid. So not great, not terrible. Worth playing, worth having, but not something I'd tell you to go and break down the bank for. So yeah, let me know what you think of these games. Let me know if you have any other games you would suggest that are just eh. And yeah, as a reminder, I do have a Patreon. I release a new video every Tuesday. Once again, thank you all so much for checking out these videos every week. It is so wonderful getting to see your comments, getting to see newcomers to the channel. Like I mentioned last time, I am trying to do some more television stuff. So I actually went back and reread the first Wheel of Time book in preparation of going and doing a summary of season 1 of Wheel of Time and then looking into season 2. And oh my god, I thought that season 1 was unfaithful to the books before, but then being reminded of how unfaithful to the books it is, wow. Yeah, if you want to hear me bitching and moaning about a television adaptation, check that out. That might be next week's video, we'll see. Anyways, it's been so nice getting a hold of you. Take care.